My name is Jane Cowley. I am an attorney. I also have a master's in social work. And I've been involved in CASA in a couple different levels at a couple different times in my life. I was on the board. I've worked on dependency and neglect cases as an attorney, so I've worked with CASAs as they advocate for children, and I've done training. Kathleen Magone sort of is the mother of this training part that we're jumping into today on report writing, and she's at a point where she's really busy, and so I've stepped in and kind of taken her materials and massaged them here, there, and everywhere. And I did this presentation in the fall, and this is the second time I've done this training, so I'm excited to see all of you here. And I understand that last week was about interviewing. Tonight we talk a little bit about interviewing in the context of your report writing, so you'll get some refresher on that stuff. Feel free to stop and ask me questions along the way to make sure that what I'm saying makes sense and we're all following right along. A little bit more background as to who I am. I work now at Ward & Thane as a private attorney. Most of my work is with families in everything from adoptions to contested probates and every issue that a family has in between. Sometimes good stuff about estate planning, sometimes hard stuff about ending relationships and moving forward. I have a fabulous almost 9-year-old and fabulous almost 5-year-old. The older one is my daughter Bella, and then the younger one is my son Keegan. And so earlier today when I said, I am fine with distractions, so if you're hungry or you're thirsty or you need to go do something, you feel free to do it. And that will not be a bother to me at all. You have some materials that I put together and handed out. We'll go over these. Then, because I am mean, I'm going to make you do small group work today. And you can either love it or hate it, but it's totally up to you. There are all sorts of other ones. So we'll go through this, then we'll have a little break. Then I'm going to give you each scenarios, and we're going to do these things where one of you gets to be a CASA, and one of you gets to be the person who's read my little scenario, which is really Kathleen's scenario, and then you interview each other, and then we talk about, so what did you learn? Did you get the key points? What would actually make its way to a report? So that's kind of what the day or evening lies ahead with for all of you. I have your updated template because it finally occurred to me I'm using materials that started in 2009. Maybe I should call the CASA office and say, you doing anything new and different? And you are, so we'll be able to go over all that stuff. So, with that huge introduction, any questions to start off with, or should we jump right in? All right. So, report writing. What is the function of the report? Where does it go? What's it about? The first thing that everybody tells you when you're writing, know your audience. So, in October, when I was getting ready to do this training, I talked to your audience. I talked to the judges and the county attorneys and the private attorneys and the public defenders who work on cases with CASAs and said, what do you want to see in reports? What do you like? What do you not like? What works? What doesn't work? And that's kind of where our handout starts tonight, is who is your audience? You are the eyes and ears of the judges. They have a high volume of cases, and they really do read CASA reports and put weight into the information that you're giving them about the children. As you've heard earlier tonight, there's a lot of turnover with the other people who are involved in the cases, and often it's the CASA who has the institutional memory. So often it's the CASA's report that carries some of the weight, because you'll know the child throughout the term of the case better than some of the other players that are involved. So what the judges like to see in your reports, the best interest of the child. What does the child need? It's kind of the governing language that we use in all family law matters, and it means different things for dependency and neglect cases than it does for divorce cases, but it really is the heart of what you're doing, the voice of the child and what that child needs. You also want to know how the parents are handling the treatment plan. Have you all kind of gone over that piece of the case so you understand treatment plan and all those pieces of what's going on? Your role is independent from the department. There have been times when a attorneys start to become really suspicious that CASAs aren't being independent because they're just saying everything that the worker's saying. Well, often it's because the worker and the CASA both have the same goal, that the child's needs get met, and the attorneys are busy in their adversarial role as protecting the interest of the parents. So when you're doing a report and you notice that a lot of what you have to say follows what the worker is saying or somebody else in the case is saying, throw in some things that show it's your individualized opinion and it's your research, not, well, I learned from the worker that the child's doing really good at school. You would never say that because that's not how you would find that out. You would say, after reviewing the report card and the attendance sheets, I could determine that the child is more engaged in school with better grades than they were prior to this placement at foster home. So make sure to include the details to show that your work is independent. No need to repeat what is in the reports. This was a big one that came up when we were talking about what people like to see. Sometimes in my own writing, I like to start with what I'm most familiar with because I know totally how that's going to fit and what I'm going to say and where it's going to go. That often means that you're saying the same thing that you just said in your last report to the court. So do that in your first draft and then work with the great people at the CASA office as you do your edits and reviews to get down to what's important. While the judges do read your reports, one of the best ways to make sure they keep reading them, keep them short, keep them concise, and keep them relevant. What's the new news? What's the gotcha? Don't bury the lead. Make sure the information that is most important for people to be thinking about when making decisions is right there and easy to find. Another really important thing that I got from the bench was make it positive. There are times when you have to give really hard news in a report. You have to talk about someone's failed attempt at treatment. You have to talk about the teenage mother who's left Mountain Home because she's not able to follow the rules there. And there are ways to deliver that information to the court and to the decision makers in a way that cuts off hope. And there's a way to do it that focuses on the facts and looks at what you're hoping for to get out of the situation, ways that they could get better. So instead of saying the damn drug addict is at it again, the father had been in treatment at Turning Point and the counselor has had to terminate services because he's no longer meeting the program's expectations. However, if he does X, Y, and Z, he could get back into treatment. Find out that information. If you found out they've lost services, well, what do they need to do to get back into services? If you know it's part of their treatment plan and it's a hurdle they have to cross to be able to have time with their kids again, make sure we're given the bad news with the rest of the news of, so what happens next? What are the other options? Do we think that, well, the reason that they became non-compliant in the drug program had something to do that the decision maker should know about? Did they lose a family member? Did they have a breakup? Was there a significant event in the child's life that they didn't get to participate in? There are times when some of that stuff is going on and all the other people who are involved in the case are too busy with their role that they forget to seek out the context for events. And a CASA report is a great place to make sure that we keep the context of the events in the story. Visitation issues, abundant and eternal, offer alternatives. This was one that is always encouraging to hear from the bench, that the judges are open to hearing creative ideas. Again, who are you often working with? People who have a high turnover rate and a high volume of cases. And who are you? People who stick with it, know your kids, and can bring a variety of experiences to being a CASA. You have each other that you get to work with. You've got the staff of the CASA program who have support and experience, and you can come up with some creative ideas. There are other options besides a visit at the DFS office. What makes sense for this family? What's a good answer in context? And the judges will say yes to things that meet the bottom line of safe and child appropriate. So if your idea is, wouldn't it be great to send them to Disneyland? Probably can't do that. But if there's something that makes sense for the particular family, Feel free to be creative. Feel free to push for. You know they have gas cards. You know they have options for some resources out there. And be creative about how those options could be used for the particular child that you're advocating for. If you learn that your child really, really loves to be outside, why don't we figure out a safe and appropriate way to do something at Blue Mountain for the kids? If you find out that the child you're working with really relaxes and is at their best when they're around pets, well, why don't we figure out a way to make that part of the next visit? So think through who you're working with and ways to be creative. The judges will respond positively, and they're asking that from you.
We had a great one a while ago where the visitations were a little iffy, and the CASA found out that the group home happened to be going to the fair as a group, and so they talked about having mom go with the group, so it was a completely supervised environment. There was lots going on. She got a great opportunity to kind of do some interaction in a really supervised setting, and it worked really well, and then she got to take them later on her own. It was kind of the first little way into their visitations going back.
Yeah. So the judges are looking for that creativity. Don't feel like, oh, I'm just a silly CASA coming up with this creative idea. You can say, no, actually the judges told Jane and Jane told us that we should be creative. So go for it. The county attorney. The county attorney is an attorney all the time. So the first thing they say to me is, remember to keep your facts and your opinions separate. Which is attorney speak for saying, if you're going to say it, make sure you have something you can cite for saying it. And if you're going to say it, make sure that you know the difference between the facts and your opinions. And keep your opinions separate. Another really good reason to keep your opinions out of it, opinions are a complete open field for attorney fighting. I know this because I am one. And if you put an opinion in something, I can find all sorts of ways to try and undermine everything else you're saying because, well, what's your authority for that? How can you say that? What does that mean? But if you give me facts that support your opinion and you don't give me the conclusion, I have to reach it on my own, probably am not going to argue with myself when I get there in the end. So play our own game with us. Get back at being an attorney. The attorneys for the parents. They come to this feeling like they're always fighting an uphill battle. And so when I asked them if there was anything they want to say, look at the difference. The county attorney has the resources of the state. They have one piece of advice for you. The private attorneys who don't have the whole authority of the state, they have many pieces of advice because they're most worried. They want to make sure that who the CASA is an independent advocate for the child who's not another person out there looking at a way to cut down their client, the parent. So when you know your audience is kind of know that sometimes attorneys require delicate handling. And I think some of you are experienced CASAs and maybe could share some stories about how sometimes the hardest interviews are the ones that you have with the attorneys. One of the most important thing though, talk to people, including the parents and their attorneys up front, and talk to many different sides of the story. One of the things that'll happen is there will be a family group decision-making meeting, or there will be another event that occurs where all of the decision makers are there and you can't be there because you're a CASA and you have a gazillion things that you balance on your plate. So you'll call Dennis Radke because he's an amazing volunteer coordinator and he'll be staffing the meeting, and you'll say, Dennis, how did the meeting go? And he'll tell you everything that he heard. But then you know who else you should call? Every other person who was at that meeting. And you should see what they heard and what they thought about and what stuck in their head, because everybody who listens through their own lens, and you will get a different perspective if you're able to include in your investigation and in your work for the child everybody's perspective. It can add time to the process, but it will also add a depth of understanding that you often don't get if you go to the meetings yourself, because you're there, so you hear it through what you heard because you were there, so you know what happened, and you don't check in with the other people who participated. So sometimes you can get more out of a meeting by not going if you take the time to go around and learn what other people listened to, what they reacted to, what was important to them. And even meetings where there's a final decision, there are pieces where there wasn't consensus that you might learn something that's important to the kid that should be included in your next report to the court. So here is definitely just from the perspective of a parent's attorney. Don't forget that reunification may be important. I think you probably all learned that in your training, that when you're looking at the best interest of the child, that question doesn't have an answer the first day you start asking it. And that question has a different answer at different times. Sometimes reunification is definitely the plan, and the concurrent planning makes sense because you know that's the direction that you're going to be going in, and boy, you're glad. But halfway through the process, something happens. An event happens where a parent is no longer able to meet the capacity they need to parent. And that's why the concurrent planning on the other end makes sense, that we were looking for permanency and placement as well. And always being able to keep both ideas in your head when you're looking at the child. And okay, if we're going to go down the road of reunification with the parent, what's going to look best about that? What supports are we going to want in place? How does the child need to maintain a relationship so they can get a comfort level with being home? But at the same time, if our best answer is not going to be reunification, what does the child need to be developing in their other relationships? So that could be good. So being able to kind of think of two different ideas at the same time and move forward. Understanding bias, I think you have whole training about that. And have they already had that one, or when does that?
Have that one, right? Bias?
Yeah.
We talk about it all. We talk about it every time.
Exactly. So it's a little bit of.
Oh, that's a lot on the poverty training. Will be the
Right.
last one.
Okay.
Yeah, so that'll be the end.
All right, so you'll get even more about that. And don't be afraid that if there is an issue in a case that you're writing, to just put your bias right in your report. There is this issue and I feel like I'm reacting to it. And you know, even if it doesn't stay in the final report you give to the court, it's a total, hello, CASA program staff, help me, I am struggling with this place, where Tara will read it, or Dennis will read it, or your office staff will be able to say, oh, I see that this is coming up for you in this case, and what are ways that we can talk through it, guard against it, manage it. So be transparent with yourself and transparent with the court. Know the children that you represent. That's the part that you got to do last week. Interviewing children, knowing who they are and what they're afraid of and what they're excited about, and finding a way to make that concrete for the judges and the attorneys and the social workers so that those issues can be met. It is CASAs who remember things like kids like to get birthday cards from their parents. And it is CASAs who make that happen, because the attorneys are busy looking at the big picture, the judge is busy with the huge volume of other issues that he's working on, and the foster parents and the group home staff are doing the best they can, and nobody is saying, hey, mom's incarcerated, let's make sure that someone gets her a card so that she can send it to her kid, because it would make a huge difference in her child's life to have that card. So knowing your kids means finding ways to help other people know them and support them too. So there you go, knowing the audience. Any questions about that part, or any other things you'd like to know about what judges or attorneys or caseworkers are thinking about when they're looking at the reports? The next part is just more into your role. What are you doing when you're writing your report? Objective, complete, and accurate. Basic writing rules. People read your report, and it's a permanent part of the record. It's going to be there for people to refer back to. It could be a basis for reunification. It could be a basis for termination. It can be something that you're asked about later. If you end up working on a case that gets contested and your report becomes part of the record that people need more information about, you could be asked questions about it. So make sure that you're familiar with what you're putting in there and why you put it in there. Information that's best is stuff that you've observed or you've personally confirmed. Other things that end up getting in there are just kind of general impressions about things you've heard from other people, and sometimes those sneak into our reports because it just feels like, of course we all know this. But then if you can't look at a statement you've put in there about the child is afraid of what, why, how do we know it, where do we get that information from, probably doesn't need to be in this report at this time because you'll probably be able to figure it out later. So at this point, make sure you can back up the impressions that you're sharing. Do independent analysis. We've talked about that some already. And then just basic tips. When you're writing a report and you know other people aren't going to agree with something you're going to say, it's okay to put that in there. The mother's attorney is going to say blah, 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 but my evidence shows that's not the case, and this is why. Or the department's position has been that once-a-week visits are all that can be handled. But what I've noticed is reports that at the end of every visit, the child always wants to engage in additional games and doesn't want to leave the parent, and seems like their schedule has room for more time, so we should probably consider increasing the amount of visits the child has with the parent. Or if someone's asking for more visits and you see behavior or you get reports that show after every visit, the group home reports that the child has bedwetting and nightmares and regressive or aggressive behavior, well then put that in there and say, while father's attorney is encouraging increasing visits, the documents from the group home reflect that the child's having a really hard time with the current visits and it may not be time to increase them. So just think of what is the information that's already out there that the decision makers are looking at, and how are you going to respond to that? If you know that at every family group decision-making meeting or every time people are getting together, somebody's pushing for something and you know it's not best for the kid, feel free to build up what the issue is and then put down all the evidence as to why that's not going to be a good fit. And it's a lot more powerful if you connect those dots for the court. Because again, whose report gets read the most often? Yours. So if your report can include all the dots, the higher the chances that you'll be able to bring your audience with you in making the decisions that are best for the children. Generalizations, not so effective. He's a good dad, she's a bad mom, doesn't paint a detailed picture at all. Doesn't give us enough information. That could be a nice sentence to start off with as you're trying to get your writer's block to go away and get your brain thinking. But as you move into how do you know he's a good dad, or what do you know makes her a bad mom, and go back and edit that first sentence out and just keep always on time for visits, comes prepared with activities to engage the child in, and is attentive to the needs presented, or comes smelling of alcohol, hasn't been able to engage in the child with the child during the duration of the visits. So what are the things that make you think something and make it clear?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
On your report writing tips, the first paragraph you give an example of this ER information. Now, can we actually go to the ER and read the reports?
You'll be able to have access to a ton of information.
Okay, so this would be in the file?
It would either be in the file.
That was overlooked by other people? Is that what this example is about?
You'll either get it from the file that you can access from the DFS office, or your court-appointed order allowing you to act as a CASA gives you an independent right to get additional investigation. So if you know someone's talked about an ER visit and there hasn't been a record of it, you can take your court-ordered appointment and go to medical hospital records division and say, I understand that this child was here. Here's the order granting me access to all of their information. May I please have it? Had time with the family before there's a removal and before there's an active case, because there's a whole bunch of stuff that can happen at the CFS end before it becomes a court end and before it becomes an opportunity for you to be involved. So make sure when you're looking at CFS files that if there was any kind of voluntary agreements or anything that happened with the family with CFS prior to it becoming a court case, that you get access to that stuff too, because sometimes they forget to give you the whole picture. Usually they're pretty good though, actually. They're not trying to keep secrets, they're just having a volume issue. Okay. Common sense. What is the big picture? What's the overall view? Depending on what's going on in court, different parties can get hyper-focused on one piece of the puzzle. If you're having a hard time finding paternity, the court case can focus a lot on that issue, and you can spend a lot of status conferences learning about the efforts on that end. And that's really not the big picture. That's part of the picture, and so is the CASA. If at the time that the status conference is going on and we're having the umpteenth conversation about the third man that we're serving who might or might not be the potential father, and there's a kid issue that's going on, the kid's got a school science project and the materials they need haven't been taken to the group home, and you know that, it's completely legitimate to take up the court's time and say, while we're all here, there are a couple other issues that we need to look at. So don't get so focused on what other people are focusing on that you forget the overall big picture of what's best for this child, and look for creative times to advocate for the child on those issues. And then also work with your process to make sure when you're looking at the little things that they need to move forward, what is their big picture of moving forward going to look like, so that you're keeping a balance in your investigation and your report writing. It's good to be able to look at what's gotten better and what's gotten worse. Have a time frame for when you're writing reports. So what's the new information and what makes it new? Being specific.
How often do we write a report to the court?
We'd like it to be quarterly. Or we also say as often as is needed to provide updated information.
Okay.
We at least like it to be quarterly to keep things timely, and then it keeps the court informed. But if things are happening and there needs to be a report because whatever happened, then we encourage you to write a report.
If you do your quarterly report and you say, Mom's at Mountain Home, receiving services, doing great, and Mom and baby get kicked out of Mountain Home the next week, of course you're doing a new report. You're not waiting 3 months. You're saying, whoa, got some new information. But if you do your report and Mom continues to get services at Mountain Home and there isn't a change in her status there or other needs, absolutely could wait 3 months before you say anything else. Yes.
We help.
Thank God.
We help a lot. We look over all of them.
Before submittal?
And there's probably still a typo in there someplace.
Of course.
Oh, I hate it when I send something to the court and I've looked at it and my secretary has proofed it and then I've looked at it again.
And you're like,
Yeah.
That's what jumps off.
Yeah, and then you say, that sentence doesn't actually end. It is 3 words left in the middle of a paragraph that really add nothing except for confusion. Yeah. No period or no even completed thought. Those are my favorites. Where I'm like, did no one catch that? No.
We're following right along with you.
Yeah, exactly. I know exactly where she's going with that. So good I don't even need to use words. Oh, I wish that was the case.
Now, people who do this for a living tend to use much more formal language. Can we get by with more conversational language?
The judge knows that you're not all attorneys.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the judge doesn't want you to write like you were an attorney. And you don't have to say, comes now the CASA for the child, and herewith presents.
I met with Jane. She is fine.
Yes. Yeah, it can be a Dick and Jane reader.
Do we get a sample report?
I have some today. I'll give them to you.
We have the back end of our website that'll give you guys all access to.
Oh, okay.
And
That's right.
so
We
there's,
don't have that yet.
yeah, so we'll give you that, and we have sample reports. We have kind of the, one that you can kind of fill in. There's.
Let's jump to that right now. Let's answer all of our report writing. What do they look like and what do we do with them questions right now? This is the template that you use to start dumping in information. So you've done your investigation, you've gathered your facts, you've measured your short-term concerns with your long-term concerns, and you sit down. And at the top of the page, you write your identifying information, but not your home address. Keep it with the CASA address. You do not need anyone to come find you. You don't need your personal phone number, ever. You need the CASA phone number. Should have also the CASA email up here and the updated template.
Actually, that's a good reminder that I need to do that this week.
Exactly, that will happen. So we are the 4th Judicial District in Missoula. The department, we have 4 departments in our district court: Judge McLean, Judge Townsend, Judge Deshaw, and Judge Larson. CAS number, DN, that stands for dependency and neglect. Then the next number is going to be the year, so this is 13. And then the case number, which is sort of a sad thing to be tracking. Like if you're DN 1345, crap, we've had 45 families and kids already here, and it's only January 3rd.
Well, what's even sadder is when it's like 2009 or 2010.
Yeah.
Right, when the year that it started. That is a really good point. Then the judge's name, so his department number and the name. I wish that after practicing for 10 years, I could tell you, oh, Department 4, that's going to be Judge, I think it's Larson, but don't hold me to it. Court-appointed special advocate, that's you. Third report, first report, emergency report, my pants are on fire report, please read it right away report, whatever it is. Then in the matter declaring whatever the child's name is, a youth in need of care. That's the name that we give juveniles who are in the dependency and neglect process. Then your name is a court-appointed special advocate, submits the following report and recommendations regarding the best interest of Bella Losi, age 9. Thankfully, my daughter does not currently have a pending case, but if she did, that's what it would say. First section, background and update. So your background section doesn't have to say everything that it does the first time. The first time your background section is going to orientate everybody to who the parties are and what's going on. By the time you do your third report, you don't have to orientate everyone to who they are, just the new stuff that's going on. If dad was in pre-release and is now out of pre-release, that goes in the background section. If there's been a change in people who are being considered for concurrent placement, that could go in here. But what's a snapshot of the players and the issues? Then CASA contacts. Who have you talked to recently? The parents. And how many parents are you dealing with? Sometimes it's easy to know the answer to that question because it's just mom, or it's just mom and dad, or it's just mom and 2 putative dads because we haven't decided who dad is yet. Sometimes it's mom and dad, and there's some extended family that you might want to consider parents, like a step-parent. A step-parent doesn't have a legal standing in a dependency neglect case, but they may be involved in the matter. So think about who all the people are, the child, who they are, and what's going on. Education, what's the history of the child, what's going on with them at school. Often you'll be dealing with kids who are either on a 504 plan or an IEP, and so making sure you're getting access to those records and those meetings and that information. Does everyone know what 504 and IEP means, or did I just speak Latin? I hate it when I speak Latin. An IEP is an individualized education plan, and those are available for kids who are getting full-blown special education services from a school. So that may mean that they're in a special ed classroom, or it may mean they just have a plan that tracks them in their general classroom with special supports. An IEP requires a parent signature. However, if a parent is in a DN case, it's also going to require a signature from a person appointed to sit in that role. Often it's going to be DFS. Sometimes it's another person that the school or the parents or the process nominates. So sometimes you may know who would really be the best person to make IEP decisions, and you're going to ask for an education advocate for your child who's not the CFS worker. So think of that.
We're really, that's the new addition into our court reports is this education piece, and it's for a number of reasons. It is really, I can't remember all the stats off the top of my head, but kids in foster care graduated about nationally, they don't necessarily track it in Montana, but nationally it's like 50%. They achieve at a much lower level, and a lot of that is, it's partly poverty issues, it's partly that they get pulled out of school so much, and they're just not in class as much. Every time they get pulled out, you can imagine if you're switching teachers all the time. And so that's something that we want you as CASAs to really start to consider is, you know, can we talk to this foster placement about potentially driving the extra 4 blocks so they can stay in their home school? You know, telling the court that, or, you know, maybe you're talking to the teacher and after every Wednesday the kid's acting up in class because Tuesdays just happen to be visitations with that. I mean, all that is really important for the court and for that kid's, I mean, we're talking best interest of the kid, this kid getting a good education, as good as they can get, and achieving at the level that, you know, helps them have a better life after, you know, after this is all over, whether that's dismissal or not, is important. So that's kind of just things to keep in mind too. It's not just for the court, but it's also for
the child. Absolutely. There's really interesting stats and studies about the impact on children if they have to change schools often and their learning is set back every time they have a transition. And so some kids really are at a point where they never get to develop the learning skills that they would need because they move from a group home, first they're in placement with their family, then there's a sentinel event that has them pulled out, and the first place they go is a group home. And the group home tries to get them back to their home school, but can't because of too much crisis going on, don't know what's going on. There's a sibling who wasn't removed and it's not safe, and so kid goes to a new school. Then group home is no longer providing services because kiddo gets to go to a foster home. Foster home has the child go to the same school that the foster siblings are going to because that seems like a really good decision and that's going to be really supportive. Then there's a kinship placement. And so now the kid's moved again. And we're talking less than a year and we've made all of those shifts. But if you're able to track what's going on education-wise and you're able to say, wait, kid has an IEP before we move, let's make sure there's services available in that other school district. It's just another really key place to track what's really in the child's best interest along with all the other pieces of the puzzle that are getting attended to.
And what does 504 mean?
504 is when you're not a full-blown IEP kiddo, so you're not going to get the same level of services as an IEP. With an IEP, there are specific special education requirements that say if you're having a behavioral problem that relates to your diagnosis, your discipline has to be appropriate to your behavioral issues. So a kid who has ADHD and gets out and walks out the door all the time can't just get sent to the principal's office because he's not walking out to be a jerk. He's walking out because his brain can't attend to the task of sitting still. So how you discipline him has to be different. If he's only on a 504, he's not going to get the same accommodation. And so the school may be reacting to his behavior that's a result of a diagnosis, but treating it like a discipline issue. So in cases where you have a 504 kid, there's often more advocacy work that needs to be done because it's not as fully understood. The difference between behaviors that relate to a diagnosis and behaviors that are just age-appropriate jerkiness, and figuring out how to deal with that. So good to know where, if you're working with a child who has an educational identifier, what is it? What do we know about it, and how's it working for them? Progress report, are they doing well? It is really fun to get to brag about kids And CASA Reports gets to be a place where you do that, where kids make the honor roll and you get to see the resiliency of children. And that is one of the most beautiful things about working in family law, is knowing the chaos and the crisis that they're living with and getting to celebrate the things that they still do right. And maybe doing right means they get perfect attendance. Maybe doing right means they get great grades. Maybe doing right means they did a beautiful art project. But you'll be able to find it, and you'll be able to celebrate it, and you'll be able to make everybody pause long enough to remember this is still a kid with a future and promise and capacity, and you get to write that right here in your report, and it reminds you to do that. Concerns. What are the issues that you're seeing with the child or the family or the treatment plan? Sometimes a concern can be, I read the treatment plan and I can't figure it out, and I'm not in DFS. So if I can't follow what this parent's supposed to do to reunify with their child, maybe this thing should be rewritten. Sometimes you get a treatment plan and it's a beautiful, clear document. Sometimes you get it and too many people worked on it. The county attorney first the social worker drafted it, then the county attorney touched it, then mom's attorney touched it, then dad's attorneys touched it, then somebody else looked at it, and then somebody else revised it, and by the time it becomes a document that you're asking a parent to sign, it doesn't make any bloody sense at all. You can say that. This makes no bloody sense at all. Or you can look at the document and say, I think it's still missing something, or I think it adds too much. And that can be a concern that you raise. Concern can be as broad or as narrow as the issue that you're finding with the kids. Recommendations. It is best if you have a concern with a recommendation tied to it. So I believe that the treatment plan doesn't provide enough support around the addiction issues. Recommendation, add treatment requirements to the parenting plan. Sometimes you don't know enough. The concern is something with treatment, but you don't know what's been ruled out, you don't know what's been on, so your recommendation can be further investigation by the department on this issue, or request additional evaluations, or wait to get report from Dr. Day to know more about the issue. So ideally, when you find a concern, you have an idea about how you're going to address it. If you don't, say that, and then come up with ways. If you were Czarina of the universe, what would you do to know how to handle this issue? And then make that your recommendation. And then your concerns are going to match each other. So concern 1 and recommendation 1, those are going to be the same thing. Because again, think of your reader. They're not that bright. They'll get lost if you don't do it in order. Then you will sign it, and then you will do a certificate of service, and we'll say all the places it goes to. And guess what you have? CASA support staff to make sure that your certificate of service is complete and that your documents get copied and sent to all of the right people. Courts always get the original. The attorney for the mother gets a copy. The attorney for the father gets a copy. The social worker gets the copy through the county attorney's office. And that is how the report is shared and generated and put out there. Other questions about just the fundamental function of how do you put it together? And you do your first draft, and then you email it, and CASA looks at it and says, were you sleeping during Jane's recommendations? Because you didn't number your concerns in your recommendations, and we can't track them. Or this is brilliant, and it's good to go. But you have great editors available to make sure your document is doing what you want it to do. What are we at for time? It is already 7:45. So how about I hand out sample reports for you guys to look at, and then you can take a break, and then you can come back and you'll have all the fun of a small group exercise. I know you're pretty excited, but try and return. Don't run away. They're not positive. They don't encourage people to change in a better way. One of the things the court specifically, but the other parties also said, was to the extent you can say it in a nice way, say it in a nice way. To the extent you can provide positive redirection provide positive redirection. You don't have to always use a stick, you can use a carrot. And so finding ways to say blunt things in nicer ways instead of ignoring, has not completed any of the steps that were outlined for her. It is of concern that she hasn't completed any of them. But so you want other people to know she's not doing it, but know it in a way that doesn't say, you idiot.
Yeah, okay.
Looking over my list of other tips that we haven't gotten to, information that motivates people to improve. Look for multiple sources for an issue. Don't automatically blame whoever else has been blamed, or limit who you think the source of issues could be, because you might find out that one of the reasons the child's having a hard time at school right now is because of the person he's sitting next to keeps stealing his paper. Well, yes, he's a child who's in a dependency and neglect proceeding and things are hard for him, but he's also still a kid in a classroom. And if you can find out that there are some issues that are just kid issues, those are some of the easiest ones to redirect and address. So look for some of those obvious answers and address those too. Foster placements sometimes are really great and sometimes aren't. Sometimes aren't for simple reasons, like a kid would do better without siblings, or without a pet in the house, or it's just not a good fit. And you can give feedback about that issue without being negative or mean, or thinking these foster parents shouldn't have any kids, but maybe this particular kid isn't the right fit for their household. Cite sources. If you're going to quote someone, you'd always put who you're quoting, but if you're just going to generalize information, identify where you got it from. After reviewing the hospital records, or the documents from the school, or after meeting with the parish priest or whoever it was. Longer is not better. It is not an essay that has a particular word length. It is not something that needs to have a bunch of beautiful extra adjectives. It just needs to be clear. It has to cover the important things. And shorter sentences are better. I hate short sentences. I always use really long ones, and then my secretary goes through and says, well, that's a 3-sentence sentence, and makes it better. So try not to be like me. Try and make a 1-sentence at a time. And another important thing, if you're going to quote a professional, ask permission first. This is important for a couple reasons. One is if you're going to attribute a statement to someone, make sure they're ready for that to be out there. And the second really important one is you have a long-term role in this family's life as the CASA, but there are other people who also have a long-term role. And treating relationships between therapists and teachers with children and parents are a very, very, very delicate thing. The mom will tell you the teacher completely likes me and feels really sorry for my situation and blames it all on the department that this mess is going on. And then the department will tell you that no, the school is aware of mom's problems and mom's issues. Mom doesn't need for you to be the person who tells you that the emperor wears no clothes. She needs to have the illusion of support. It's going to help her get through this. So how can you be direct and accurate without taking apart some of those fantasies that people are holding on to? Probably one of the ways you can do that is not saying, teacher believes mom is the source of the problems. Because if mom needs to believe that's not true, you don't have to say it. It's not going to make the case better. It's not going to change the outcome. You can give the information accurately and truthfully without sharing all of the truth. Edit, we talked about that. And then just a simple tip, take notes during interviews. It's easy to forget things. And it's easy to have a lot going on between when you interview someone and when you actually get to sit down and put your report together. And if you don't have at least themes and topics and issues jotted down, you might be a little bit lost when you say, I know we learned something really important. What was it? So there you go. Those are all the other things. We've looked at the template. You've looked at the examples. Some good things you pointed out about how you would already be better report writers then we're in there. And now, urine analysis.
I have one more question. So what if you do find out information like in the medical report that's completely different than what the mom has been saying? I guess, yeah, you have to write that in a way that's going to really upset the mom either way, because it's going to show that she's lying. So,
but I wouldn't say it's clear that the mother is lying because the report says blah, 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 blah. I would say reports indicate that mother was drunk at the time of the accident, or...
So we can kind of pretend to not connect the dots.
Right. Sometimes
You're not mom's friend, so making mom upset.
Yeah.
But you're also the child's advocate, and the child loves the mom and needs the mom. So you're not mom's condemner either. So that's the line of, I'm not your friend, but I'm not going to condemn you. I'm just going to give you the information. So you don't want to ever hide information out of fear of making them upset. But you don't have to make them upset to make it better, because disease doesn't relate to emotion. So if mom is making really bad choices based on her disease, making her feel bad isn't going to make her better about treating her disease, whatever addiction issue she may have, or schizophrenia issue she may have. If she feels bad about it, it's not going to make it better.
What about, I mean, the only time I would say it might be important to point out these inconsistencies is if it actually is relevant to the what's going on, the issue, your recommendation. You know, so it would be like,
mom needs further treatment because she has yet to realize that her statements are inaccurate with the facts.
Like every time she says something to you, she's lying. You don't have to say that, but yes.
But why does it matter that she's lying about it?
To be responsible for herself.
Right. So what are your concerns about the lie? She lied. Well, your concerns about him because she can't.
Yeah, it's until she starts taking responsibility, she's not going to go, well, no, my concern is she's got a treatment plan, and obviously she's not following her treatment plan. And
exactly.
Until she can take responsibility, she's not going to follow her treatment plan.
And so, yeah.
Looks.
It may be mom isn't displaying signs of readiness for change because she is not addressing these issues.
Do you have these catchphrases on the website?
I know.
Instead of saying mom is lying, we could say she's not showing, the ability, she's not showing a signs of readiness for change. I have to write that down.
You will learn a lot of this language when you read other reports, because readiness for change is a scale that is used in the addictions treatment world, where people are ranked from
Take that out. You should have just let us go.
I know. I would look really awesome, but instead I've just read a lot. There's pre-contemplation. You don't even know there's a problem. There's contemplation, so maybe there's a problem. There's 3 other changes after that I can't remember off the top of my head. But they go through somebody's readiness for change. And you're right, you don't have to sugarcoat they're not being ready to change, but you also don't have to lambaste them for not being ready to change. You just have to point it out.
And the other thing you can do is actually write your report, right? Write your report and highlight the sections where you're like, okay, this needs to be phrased or could be phrased better.
Yeah.
Right? And Kirsten looks it over. I mean, we try not to, we're not going to write it for you.
Well, and you're not going to change the recommendation.
Yes.
Right.
But
you
there's
can have the
definitely
suggestions.
Or you can just, sometimes when people have writer's block, they'll just call up Kirsten and say, okay, so you know the hearing and the thing, and I have no idea how to put that down. And then you just kind of talk through it, and then, or just highlight it and say, I know this section sounds terrible.
Yeah.
Do you sort of get what I'm, throwing out there? Yeah, that's what we're here for. You have 3 people now, and me as a for sure backup, but Kirsten, Corey, and Dennis are your support team. And one of them's always around, so even if it's not the one who's directly working on your case, there's people around.
So what about other CASAs? I know we have a mentor.
You'll have a mentor.
But we have all these confidentiality issues. Is it okay to brainstorm with other CASAs? Because they have to keep everything confidential too, so.
You can be generic and help each other out.
Okay.
And we have, once a month we have coffee and CASAs where people.
No, well, I'm talking about a more formal support group. No, I'm just.
But yeah, we kind of.
CASA Anonymous.
Yeah.
Right.
We try to have
like
some
it.
opportunities where you guys can get together, and there is opportunity in kind of a confidential environment to bounce ideas off of each other. And I'm having problems getting through with my IEP. Has anybody had any luck? With that. My wording sounds terrible. I'm struggling. I'm terrified about my first report. That's why we have mentors. That's why we have you guys. We'll all be there for each other. You have a whole team. You're not floating by yourself.
No. And when you start reading reports, you'll see that there's a lot of ways to do it, and it never gets done perfectly. But caring about the child and the good recommendations will get you what you need in there.
When I filed my first report, it was just probably the next day or the day after, I got a 6-page email from the mother correcting my report.
Oh, yes, because you must have done it wrong.
I did.
Yes.
The first thing she told me is I misspelled the name of the caseworker, which I did. But, yeah, she refuted, she really didn't refute, but she explained away all of the things that I had said that were detrimental to her.
Readiness for change.
Exactly.
She didn't exhibit signs of indicating readiness.
Yeah, exactly. She did not have readiness for change. But at least she had problem identification skills. She knew all the problems. She just didn't have solution.
So how emotionally did you deal with that? Were you kind of like, because people who don't like confrontation may turn around and be, especially people that are really empathetic, I want to say, could all of a sudden kind of adopt that and say, oh, I hurt her feelings, or I did X, or I did Y, or,
Well, the first thing I did is call Kirsten. And, and I sent the email to her. So I waited a couple of days, and then Kirsten advised me to just acknowledge the email, which I did. And I told her I was amazed at her writing skill, which I always am when I get emails from her. And I just said I would take her views into consideration.
That's good.
You're going to get mail. You're going to get mail. And sometimes it's from prison, sometimes it's handwritten, it's generally delivered to the office. That's why we have the PO.
Is it appropriate to say in a circumstance like that, you don't have to explain it to me, I'm not the judge?
It's important to redirect them to their attorneys, because they do have attorneys who get to advocate for them.
Right, you don't have to explain yourself to me, you don't have to argue yourself to me, I'm not the one judging you.
They're going to feel judged by you. So when you say, I'm not judging you, they're going to be like, so why'd you write a report judging me?
Yeah.
So I find...
Recommendation affects her directly.
Right.
Then I think you have an obligation to acknowledge.
Yeah.
Well, and she's part of it too. And, if you're advocating for the kiddo's best interest, their mom, being placed with their mom may or may not be in their best interest, but their mother being in their lives is, or the dad or the grandparent or whatever, that's part of all of it. And so I think that's a good way to acknowledge that you received it. Thank you. I read your letter carefully. And maybe you did miss something. Who knows?
Like spelling of a name.
Exactly. You'll get that right the next time in this one. It is hard to deal with a confrontation, because you will be telling people things they don't want to hear, and you will be asking things that they aren't ready to do, and you will be telling people that what they really want, just to get back to normal with their kid, they're not going to get yet. But you're not the only voice saying that, and you're not the determinative voice. You are part of the process. So people will, when they first meet you, are going to probably want to tell you a lot of their story, because you're going to meet people often earlier in the process than later, and they're going to have a lot to want to share about how hard it is and how unfair it is and how they haven't been heard, and this is going to be an opportunity to be heard and get this fixed and get this taken care of. And then you're going to do your first report that's going to say, the mom...
The child will not be placed with the mother.
Exactly. And they're going to have a really hard time with that. You don't have to explain what you did. You've done that in your report and recommendations. But you can, and you shouldn't engage in a conversation with somebody who's not ready for change. Because if someone thinks the sky is blue when it's not, trying to convince them it's blue is way above your pay grade. It is just not possible. You can't change a coping mechanism, fighting, unless you give them a new coping mechanism, and that's not part of your job. You're just there to say, working, not working, issue, not issue.
Right. So how did you then deal with the next time you had to interview her? Just,
Well, I haven't really talked to her directly. She's been in meetings by telephone. She's in Florida,
oh,
so that complicates all this. But I really haven't been in contact with her in person, and I really don't intend to.
Do you talk about ways to interview and places to interview? I can't remember what all of your training is. Yeah.
And then we do a good wrap up. But especially I think some people get that first kind of hit after that first report, because sometimes parents are not confused, but as much as you tell them, this is my role as a CASA, my CASA is to advocate for the best interest of your child, and clearly in their minds the best interest of my child is to be back with me, and so they're going oftentimes see you as kind of their advocate too. So when you do that first report, telling them otherwise, that's kind of, after that, I think they kind of have figured out the role, and their attorney's been pretty clear, because their attorney probably got a copy of whatever they sent to you as well. So it's really that first one, so if you kind of get your game face on for the first blowback, then it's not as bad after that, because you kind of get your role.
Exactly.
Yeah, I didn't take it personal.
And the ones who are engaged and wanting to get through it are going to be easier to deal with than the ones who aren't engaged and wanting to do what's best. And they'll be easier to have a thick skin around, because you'll be like, I get it, you're still not okay. And you're going to react to me, but I'm just going to keep telling the court where it's at. The hard cases for me were always the ones where it wasn't because of something the person was doing that led them to losing their children. I did a lot of cases where the parents were developmentally disabled and they couldn't parent because they didn't have the capacity to manage their own needs, let alone an infant's. And those were really hard because they just didn't know what they didn't know. But in those cases, you still just have to be really clear about, you leave the stove on and that's not safe. Or we gave you the directions about how to childproof your home, and we had the public health nurse come out to help you childproof your home, and your home is still not childproof. And we're not talking about white class not childproof. We're talking about you have open flames and knives and dog feces on your carpet, and you don't get it, that you can't do that, and you really live in a world where you don't see it. So sometimes you'll have cases that are really sad, but it's not going to make it better to pretend it's not that sad.
And they can really love their kids.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And the department has done great work with some of the families about maintaining a familial relationship and contact without any legal responsibility, because those parents can't manage the responsibility.
But most of the parents really love their kids. I mean, whether they're,
Yeah, addicted to meth?
Yeah, they love their kiddos. They really, I mean, you don't really see too many cases where they don't really, really love their kiddos.
Right. And there is no crisis that you can make better at any point in the day. So you don't have to feel like, oh my gosh, I didn't take the call. You're not a first responder. Oftentimes you feel like you know so much and you are there for some of the hard stuff and you want to be the extension of support. And you'll find yourself taking phone calls and getting into long conversations that you aren't in a role to make better. Like you said earlier, you're not their therapist. They will get funding to have therapeutic support. They will get access to resources that people who don't have this level of crisis don't necessarily get access to. So there are places to redirect them to, and that's part of what your report and recommendations can be about, is what are those places that these folks should be redirected to, so that when they are in crisis at 2 a.m., you're not the first person they think to call. A grade report, a portion of something from the record that, because what happens is a file gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And if it's not attached to your report, but it's in the court's file, the chance that the court's going to be able to find it, not so good. So if there's a prior report that you wrote that you want to compare and contrast to, or if there is something that some other party submitted that you want to say, the social worker's report said whatever, and we have, and you don't have to attach the whole darn thing. You can just attach the relevant parts, because
Do you guys use little stickers on the bottom? Do you have like the thing, or do you just type attachment A, attachment B? Handwrite?
I have the fancy stickers that say, you know, whatever petitioner or respondent or whoever I am sticker, but anything that's legible works. And if you have an attachment that's A and it's got 7 pages, have A1, A2, A3, A4, you know, make it easy for people to figure out what's going on. The court will keep theirs in a neat pile. The mom or the dad may have theirs look like it was run over by a truck and be completely out of order. The public defenders might look like that. I'm notorious for tearing apart every file that I work on, so mine might look like that, because there's another page in here that said something. So the more you can make it easy for those of us who destroy things to put them back together, the better all of that is. Exactly. That's the reason I know this tip, because I've needed it.
I was going to throw one more thing out there, kind of back to kind of timelines, like when some parents will reach out to you. As much as they do have more time than their attorney, it is important to keep in mind that some of these parents are having to attend multiple meetings at multiple times of the day. They have transportation issues anyway. They are doing their, you know, for some of them, really doing their best to try to make it to all their meetings, trying to get to everything, get their scram bracelet checked and go to therapy and pick up the kids, and they're really doing their best to get around and to do it all. So their time is also valuable, so really finding a way to balance the two, knowing that your time is also valuable, but some of them really are trying to do their best to get around, and it's really complicated to go to meetings based on all these random attorneys' calendars and the district attorney and all.
And taking the mountain line to get there.
Taking the mountain line being there, or their car broke down, or then their kid got sick, and I don't know what to do about daycare now, and can I bring them, can I not bring them, oh, I'm out of minutes. It can be really complicated to fill a treatment plan, which I think some of you guys have seen before. They're a lot. So kind of keeping that in mind too is.
And then being able to point out to the court in your report, is the failure to complete the treatment plan effort, readiness for change, engagement in services, or the kid had a fever, or the grandmother came into town and would never get off the couch. I had a case where the extended family was more of a problem than the nuclear family. Crazy mother-in-law comes in, and family system is not so smart that they don't know how to handle these things. And you know, we were finally able to work around it by getting a court order saying no other adults in the household. But the kid couldn't say no to the mom, because you can't do that in their family. That's not allowed. And mom doesn't understand why mom's making a problem for her grandchild and how she's taking up all the family resources, because the capacity is limited on her front because she's just all about herself. So is there an outside influence that you can identify? And can you recommend something to deal with that influence, so that if we didn't meet the mark on the treatment plan that we meant to, is there a good reason, or maybe a reason, that should be addressed and known? Absolutely. You guys have lots of great questions. So I don't think you get to do my small group exercise, because I don't think you can do it in the amount of time that we're left. But don't worry.
Can we just do, like, instead of all of us doing it, can we just do a role model type thing? Like,
Another exercise.
all the way up to here.
I know, I have the backup plan. But I will give you the scenarios from this So the way that this part of the training was designed by Kathleen is she would get people to come in and pretend to be a CASA or pretend to be a parent. And the person who was being the parent would get these scenarios, and the person who was being the CASA would not have the written scenario and would have to use their interview techniques to be able to learn information from the other party and then use your report writing skills to identify of what you learned, what matters, and how could you say it in a way that identifies the concern, identifies the recommendation, and is direct without being demeaning or overly negative. So how about that for an easy process? So if you want to see, so if you want to see those scenarios, we have that. But here's the other shorter exercise that we can do, which is observations from an interview like you got to see an interview when you really didn't. And what on this list would you say should go into a report and what shouldn't go into a report? And again, Kathleen put these together. Some of it you'll say, that's easy, I know the answer, and some may need some more thinking. But you can go through those and then we can kind of talk about them as a group. So the first one, mom is attending anger management and parenting classes.
Very positive.
Relevant.
Positive and relevant. Incense is burning in the home's kitchen.
Lovely.
Yeah,
No, I think it's a possible fire hazard.
exactly. Depends on where the incense is burning. You might include something about,
the kids and
yeah, where is it,
By
how,
the gas stove.
exactly,
I did not check it though. I haven't.
exactly. So that one requires context to know if it's important or not important. So make sure that if you're putting it in your report, you put in the context so they know why you care about incense. There is spoiled food on the cupboards. Relevant? Maybe, or maybe,
Yeah, is that the only food?
Weird
Yeah.
composting ritual.
exactly. Like, it's another thing that isn't enough detail to be able to tell you how big of an issue it is. Like, someone mentioned, is it the only food in the house? How much of it is it? Right. And is it on the cupboards, like, you know, on the outside of the cupboard, somebody smeared something and it never got cleaned? And so is the issue they don't know how to clean? Is the issue they don't have enough food? Is the issue they don't know how to store their food? So understand what it is so that you can develop a concern and a recommendation.
Wouldn't it also depend on whether it was a first visit or a fourth visit?
Absolutely. And if you told them the first, second, third time and it was still there, oh, the house that I went into that had the dog feces that you point out, and then the next time you go and it's still that dog feces plus some more that's gathered, and you're like, oh, you really, you don't know that really you can't do this with, yeah. Yeah. And do not have a sensitive stomach. Because, family has 2 dogs and a ferret.
Well, by default, anybody with a ferret.
Exactly. It's, again, one of those things that family has pets. Matters, doesn't matter. Is the kid still in the home and they're not being well cared for and that's an issue? Or family has 2 dogs and a ferret and kid is not in the home and kid really misses the pets and would bond better. And so what does this fact tell you about this family, and how can you use it to make a meaningful report identifying a concern and a recommendation? Grandfather has long hair. Can't find a way that there's enough context for that for it ever to matter. But if somebody could, feel free. Exactly. The home contains no beds for the children. They sleep on the couch or the floor.
Probably.
Yeah. Probably.
Circumstantial, especially because, and I only say that because in our manual it actually gives a case how, just like we were talking about our bias and different levels of care, that it was okay if they had blankets and were on the floors because they couldn't provide for the furniture, but they were perfectly well taken care of in every other capacity.
Right. If are they warm? Are they comfortable? Are they getting enough sleep? Are they able to attend to their needs? How much does it matter? And maybe the concern isn't you don't have a bed, so you shouldn't get your kids, but you don't have a bed, and we've got resources in this community that could bring that into your home. And so it's not a concern that says you don't get to parent, but it's a concern that says this community that's providing support needs to do more. Mom smelled of alcohol and had trouble answering questions.
Oh, yeah.
Probably.
Exactly. Dad attends NA, Narcotics Anonymous, several times each week. Last 3 UAs are good.
Positive.
Here's a friendly tip. Know what the UA is testing for. Because sometimes Dad has 3 UAs that are good and he's going to NA because he's got that cocaine habit handled, but he's not going to Alcohol Anonymous, and he's drinking like a fish, and a UA won't screen for alcohol unless you request it. And when UAs screen for alcohol, or when other testing beside a scramp screens for alcohol, the most generous window of time where you're going to catch it is 82 hours. Right. So depending when they drank and when they tested.
Are the UAs, is there like in employment law, right? You send somebody in, there's a screening, this is what we typically screen for. So how do they do that here? Are these personalized? Do they actually say we want him?
Most people do the,
or is it a panel?
It's the 8 panel test.
So it's the typical.
So it's typical, but if you know in the case that their drug of choice is one that is not typically screened for, or you know that they're doing bath salts, or they're doing something more peculiar than is typically going to be screened for, you're going to want to point out that this great result doesn't necessarily mean it's a great result. It just means we're not screening for what we should be screening for. Okay. You're going to be familiar when you do this work with a bunch of the different providers in town. Evolution Services, the people who run Scram, whose name I can't think of off the top of my head.
Evolution Services we work with.
A ton.
A ton. That's your main one you do work with.
So there are people who are at Turning Point, and you will get familiar. 16-year-old brother has many tattoos and piercings.
Are they safe and clean, and how are they being financed?
Exactly. And are they racial epitaphs? Are they, is there something about them that tells you there's a risk issue besides tattoos? If it's just body art, it's just body art. But if it's
gang tattoos.
Yeah, but if it's body art that has a message that relates to an issue in the case, and you know, how are you financing it is a darn fine question, because they ain't free. Children under 6-year-old were left unattended in the home for 30 minutes.
Yep.
And what else do we know about that issue? They were left in the home for 30 minutes because of a trip to the emergency room, because of, we thought that the crazy mother who was sleeping on the couch and was supposed to be taking care of the kids was going to watch the kids. So what is, you know, did we leave them with an irresponsible caregiver, or did we just think it was totally okay? I had a case where they really thought it was totally okay to leave the baby because he was sleeping, and we would be back in 6 hours, and he usually slept for 6 hours. He's the baby, not okay.
Are there any kids under 6 years old that are allowed to be unattended for 30 minutes?
We can't think of a...
My kid.
Yeah. No.
Okay.
No. It's a really young
Probably not
age.
Still living.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't even think 6. I mean, I'm looking at that and I was like, what?
Yeah. You can't, there aren't any state guidelines that tell you at this age your child can be left home alone safely without it being an issue.
It's like 12 and 12 and under? Or
there isn't a rule. There's just ideas and thoughts.
Of the kid. Because for some people, even at 12, you're perfectly fine, you can take care of your younger siblings, that's great. If someone calls 911 and says these kids are home alone, you know, is there concern for them being alone? However, there are plenty of 12-year-olds who can't take care of anybody for themselves and are going to set the house on fire.
Yeah, my mom can't feed herself, so I don't know if she should be able to be home.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I would admit to leaving my almost 9-year-old at home for 30 minutes, but
I think that 9, 10 ages.
would trust her. When my son, who's now almost 5, when he's 9, I can't imagine we'll be leaving him home ever alone because, well, he's a boy who leads with his head and asks questions later, and he would eat us out of house and home, and would be a bad idea.
I also think it's important with that too to add in context of, you know, what was in the home, because often that's a big thing too.
Was the incense burning on the table?
Was the gun the gun safe unlocked enough? Well, that's
Did they have a way to contact somebody if they needed help? Was there a neighbor they could go to if they needed something?
And maybe it was some sort of super extenuating circumstances. The 7-year-old completely, was bleeding and they tried to, whatever. Might not be right, but at least maybe they tried.
Grandmother was grooving around in her polyester pantsuits from the 70s. Can't find a way. As long as she's hanging out with a grandfather with the long hair, we're good to go. Yeah. Exactly. Furniture and carpeting are worn and stained.
Maybe.
Stained with urine or just stained with?
Yeah.
Exactly. What exactly is the note there? And is it something where you can identify a need that the community could help support? That the furniture has a broken spring in the couch, and if you sit in the wrong place, you get goosed. Should we find another couch for this family? If it's just worn out and it's not the nicest furniture you ever saw, but it's comfortable and it's safe, probably doesn't matter so much. Mom has applied for 4 jobs this week.
Yay.
Good.
Exactly. And good to know more information. In town, out of town. Jobs she's likely to get, so this is a positive sign, or jobs she's not likely to get, and this is just mom spinning wheels, so what do we know about the fact? The baby's diaper needs to be changed.
For all day.
Exactly.
Yeah, I said yes.
I put yes
All you need to see is one bad case of diaper rash.
Bloody diaper rash sucks, but I had a kid with bloody diaper rash, and generally I'm not a DFS mom. So,
But it's relevant, just in the context.
And just make sure to give more information than the baby's diapers need to be changed. I arrived for my home visit at 10 a.m. and noted at the time that I got there, the baby's diaper needed to be changed. I pointed it out to the mom after we had gotten comfortable in our conversation that maybe the baby needed to be attended to. And she said, I never changed that diaper. It's his job and he's not here. Well, okay, that might be relevant. She's refusing to participate in the care of her child because she's so pissed at the other party in the case. Or pointed out the baby's diaper needed to be changed. She was embarrassed that it hadn't been done already, hadn't noticed, was anxious about my presence, was able to immediately take the baby, calm the baby, and change the diaper appropriately. Or when the mom went to change the diaper, I noticed inappropriate conduct and whatever the concerns are.
Mom doesn't know how to look for signs the diaper needs to be changed.
Yeah, didn't wipe
it's an app to change it, yeah.
Right. So what is the full picture instead of just the headline? Dad's girlfriend is living with him and has had a DUI.
I could put kids in danger.
Yeah.
Well, we need to know who's in the household, so that's good to know.
Who's driving the kids around, and is she ever driving the kids around? And is she? And how long ago was the DUI? Was it 10 years ago?
Yeah.
That thing's been going on, or is it 6 months ago? And she's
Exactly. And is she compliant with the terms of whatever kind of sentencing she had with her DUI, and is actually a good role model because she's taking care of her business and knows how to deal with things appropriately?
Mom, dad, and girlfriend all living together.
Exactly. Who else is in this household?
And I hear grandpa and
Polyester pantsuit grandma. I love it. Babysitter's mom would really not matter. Apartment smells like cigarettes and several ashtrays are overflowing.
Yeah. Might depend on the kid's medical condition too.
Exactly. Well, and it's just
Yeah.
On like babies.
Yeah.
And then given the additional information about what should we do about this fact, not just you're not a great housekeeper. Yay! So kind of the summary of my presentation is provide facts and provide context for your facts so that people can follow along with what it is that's important, and then tie the issues that you found to ways to address those issues, both positive issues and negative issues. And the more time you spend with cases and reports, you'll come up with more creative ideas about how to phrase things or what are options. The court is open to unique recommendations. So use each other, use the support staff to come up with whatever the children you're working with would need to make it better. And then ask for it without shame and relentlessly and repeatedly if necessary. Because it is everything from the little things to the big things that will matter for the kids. And getting to be the person who's there, whose sole job is to provide the right information for the best interventions, for the best results. It's a kind of great job because everybody else there has an axe to grind and a role to play. And the attorneys will seem sometimes blind to obvious facts or heartless to emotional needs, but it's just because they're doing their job. And to do their job, they need to focus on those pieces. Thank you all for giving of your time.
Thank you very much.